Fresh scandal at the National Youth Service over the theft of 10 billion Kenya shillings, monies that have been, according to initial investigations, being siphoned out of NYS coffers in the last 3 years, following what has been termed as a well-orchestrated scheme involving senior government officials and ghost suppliers. So a fresh and stern challenge for the new Director of Public Prosecutions, Nordin Haji, as well as the new Director of Criminal Investigations, George Kinoti. They say both have confirmed that these investigations have been ongoing. Remember, there were no convictions from the earliest scandal at the National Youth Service. The figure, depending on who you ask, has been changing. But this is a whopping 10 billion Kenya shillings. I suspect this story will be developing in the coming days. According to our sources, as many as 41 individuals face arrest from this. Let me start with you, Brian. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah.
10 billion Kenya shillings?
10 whopping billion, Ben. And I think, first of all, is to thank media for highlighting this issue and bringing it, into public domain. Because if it were not for media, I think some of us would maybe not have understood that there is something in the offing in terms of loss of such amount, 10 billion in terms of Kenya shillings. Let me say that it's unfortunate that we are talking about such high magnitude corruption in this country at a time when we ought to have learned some or picked some key lessons from the first incident when NYS still went through the same, kind of issue of looting. And of course, we ought to have now learned on how to address matters of corruption in such kind of grand stage. And to me, I think seems that people have not learned their lessons properly because, of course, the punitive measures that are existing are neither here, neither there.
Do you think anything will be done about this? Do you think anyone will be held culpable?
I think if history is anything to go by, I do not think much will be done or much will come out of this whole quagmire. As much as we have a new broom which is likely to sweep cleaner, or which is supposed to to sweep cleaner in the name of one Nordin Haji, the man at the top there in terms of public prosecution. Let's wait and see how he's going to actually, justify why the country actually needs to trust in him.
Right.
Why is the man who is supposed to, rectify all the mess that has been there. So he has a huge in-tray that he has to handle. And if, history is anything to go by, personally, I don't think, he's going to fight the political forces that already exist in terms of cushioning those are capable of this.
All right. Kipchumba, 10 billion is a lot of money. And corruption has been one of the Achilles heel of the Uhuru Kenyatta administration. This is a major setback for his efforts or a narrative to fight corruption, isn't it?
It is. And Ben, when you look at it, we need to give into perspective of what 10 billion is. We need to know the optics of how much 10 billion can do in this country. 10 billion can build 2 national referral hospitals of Kenyatta's status. I think when we talk about corruption, we need to talk about corruption and appreciate it in the context that it is money that the Mwananchi is losing. It is service we lose. And when we come and address such issues, we need to ask ourselves, recently, 2 years ago, we did the overhaul of NYS, we did the top management went home, but the hypocrisy is the same corruption has persisted, which means just the cleaning of the top management in itself cannot help. We need to go deeper and get to the level whereby if people in a system can allow procurement to be done and there are no proper notes to show what was procured, that system should have been collapsed a long time ago. It goes against what the president is trying to build in terms of creating jobs and everything when we are talking about corruption each day. And we must also give it to the new prosecutor, DPP, Nordin Haji, because when you read the story, you get the feeling that there is something being done. And it is, I think, among the first time we are hearing a corruption that has not been, there is no whistleblower, but it is the government agencies doing something. We need to give them a nod on that.
All right.
And then again, we need to encourage the Director of Criminal Investigation, Mr. Kinoti, that as we do the investigations, let us at least for once nab somebody. Let us not go back to the same story whereby we go to court and we are told there was evidentiary threshold was not reached, and all this, the Mwananchi has lost money.
All right. This happened when Cecily Kariuki was the cabinet secretary in charge of youth affairs. Lillian Omolo was the principal secretary. That is after Anne Waiguru had stepped down following pressure over the previous scandal at the NYS. My question is very simple. How does 10 billion get siphoned without raising red flag for a period of 3 years?
Well, you asked 3 questions in one. So let's start from the beginning. There are a number of MPs from Rift Valley who wanted Cecily Kariuki out of government because of the KNH saga. I guess now, if they are genuine about their commitment to fight corruption, they've got fresh weapons. So now let them ask her to go home because of this NYS scandal. Now, when you look at the figure, 10 billion, and in context, the Auditor General says we lose up to 500 billion annually. So the NYS thing is merely 2% of the amount of money we lose in corruption, a very small amount. And one would expect that the new DPP is going to move with speed to ensure that all the architects of this mischief are in fact arrested and prosecuted. If they are found guilty, they are sent by the Islamists for a long while. But expecting the new boss to do that, again, is too much. Because if you look at our records, right from the time we attained independence, anybody who manages to engage in acts of corruption gets rewarded. Maybe they get head of state commendation, or during the next election, they run for office and they win. The 41 persons mentioned as the new architects of the 10 billion corruption deal, believe you me, if you're going to have elections in 2022, they will run for their party primaries in 2021 and they'll win. 2022, a number of them are going to be elected as governors, MPs, and a number of them will even find their way to their cabinets.
You don't have a lot of confidence in the new system, do you?
Well, you know, you're supposed to use the past in an attempt to predict the future. All public servants who have been accused of engaging in corruption from 1963, not a single one is spending time behind bars. If you go to South Korea, and we've been using this example, it's now getting worn out, there's a president behind bars. If you go to Brazil, there's a president behind bars. If you go to South Africa, Zuma is running all over looking for top lawyers to defend him. But in Kenya, what happens? All the suspects of corruption, right now they are MCAs, a number of them are governors, a number of them are MPs. They're holding public office. So this morning they've gone through this newspaper and they've called each other. They've said, let's do a pepper steak at a place of our choice and we enjoy single malt whiskey. And in the process, they're summoning top lawyers in the league of Kipchumba Karoria to start preparing for bonds and anticipatory bails that if Nudin wants to prosecute them, he will land at the Milimani commercial courts, and before he opens his mouth, there'll be anticipatory orders given that you cannot arrest these folks. And in my view, we've been talking about goodwill to fight corruption. If President Kenyatta is really interested in fighting corruption, and he needs to, because this corruption stuff is going to soil his reputation, he needs to give the new director for CID and Nudin overwhelming political capital, so that in the next 6 months, at least we have 2 governors behind bars. If you go to the Auditor General's report again, almost all governors have been accused of corruption.
Right.
So the president needs to ensure that we at least have 2 governors behind bars, 2 cabinet secretaries, and then maybe 2 principal secretaries. Okay. Then people will be serious. Right. Because right now, it seems that public sector officials were given a memo that they must engage in corruption. You are rewarded on how much money has been misappropriated. And the way we handle public resources is so casual. And in context, Ben, we are talking about 10 billion. This 10 billion was not supposed to put up Solai Dam. This 10 billion was investing in the future of the Kenyan youth. For some reason, if you have not made it, you've not made grades to go to a university or a polytechnic, then you have the opportunity to go to NYS and learn some new skills which can take your socioeconomic life to the next level. So a poor fella from my village in Mosocho called Momanyi, who was hoping to go to NYS, will not have the chance to go to NYS. Why? Some public servants working under the Jubilee administration have decided to squander these resources. So right now they're ordering top-of-the-range vehicles from, they're ordering Jaguars and Range Rovers from the UK. Others are buying choppers at the expense of Mwangi who are now to struggle with jiggers in Muranga at the expense of a fella called Bakari in Undanyi, who doesn't know whether if he falls sick he's going to get medical attention. And this is a national embarrassment, it's a national shame, and we must tell our members of the National Assembly and Senate, shame on them. I've not seen one MP, either a senator or a member of the National Assembly, raising a finger over the NYS. And we elected them. Part of their responsibilities is oversight. What kind of oversight have they offered for the last 6 months if nobody is going to be held responsible for 10 billion bob lost?
All right. Great context there, Dismas. And of course, it is very important to break it down to our viewers. Of course, this looting or theft or money that has disappeared from the public coffers happened in terms of, from what the initial investigations have indicated, from ghost workers being paid at the expense, ghost suppliers rather being paid at the expense of the real suppliers. And those ghost suppliers having a double payment made to them. Those are some of the things that have so far been cited as to how the money has been siphoned out. Mark, the government did a review of the Ministry of Youth and the National Youth Service back in 2015, whereby there were changes to the top management, but the government did not do the same to middle-level civil servants. Is this a possible loophole or reason why this amount of monies could have been looted?
It's not a possible loophole, it's a definite loophole, because when you see companies say being reported to have received the same amount of money twice, 10 minutes from the same, 10 minutes apart from the same system, then it tells you that it is a systemic problem. But I tend to view these things from a more optimistic view than Dismas, in this perspective that, number one, this is the first time we are seeing an article where the director of public prosecution is involved in the investigation, the CID is investigating it, and you can see that there are many, they've sent agents into the NYS in Ruaraka, and they've sat there to go through these particular papers. I think what is critical at this point is the president, whereas he cannot assure the jailing of governors, as Dismas has suggested, he can do a few things. I think one of the things that the president of this country needs to begin to do is that anyone who's appointed to senior office at the level of director and above should sign his appointment letter while handing a resignation letter to the president. So the president can fire you based on your resignation letter already received. The beauty about this is this, that the president cannot step outside of the legal framework to work against corruption. But we can begin to hold our leaders to a higher standard. What should happen in this country, the moment a scandal like this is being talked about in the paper, the next thing we should see is CS so-and-so has stepped down, PS so-and-so has stepped down, Director so-and-so has stepped down, because it was under their watch within which this was happening. And when you begin to have a culture, and this is the most important part, a culture where we take accountability of these things, then it makes sense. Because a lot of the time in this country, while we wait for the wheels of justice to turn, we do not understand that there's a social expectation that we also need to meet. And that social expectation should be that if you come to my house and my children are not being fed, you will not launch an investigation. You will take care of my children first and you'll throw me in the slum. That's how it's supposed to be. So what needs to happen, even before jail terms happen, we want to see certain people in this organization say, you know what, I was in charge of finance, the finance director. You should be writing a resignation letter today saying this happened under my watch, I am stepping down, I failed. The accountant should do the same thing. The CS should do the same thing. And that's what we need to entrench. And that is entrenchable without the necessity of a law. What needs to happen is, as a country, and this is what the president should encourage, that every CS, every PS, every CIS, every director, every CEO of a parastatal in this country should have an active resignation letter with the president, so that when a scandal like this happens, the president has the privilege of going before national TV and saying, I have today accepted the resignation of the finance director of the NYS, of the PS in charge of youth. That's what should happen.
All right. let's continue from where Mark has left it, and let me just add some of the info that the writer of history on the Sunday Nation, that is Wanjoy Gidai, says, according to why these things happened, the top management at NYS was under pressure to complete many projects, including that Nairobi slums upgrade. Procurement processes were sidestepped and merchants asked to supply goods within a very short time of period. Suppliers were then promised the paperwork would be done later. This was not done, only delivery notes were given to them. And then now, unscrupulous middle-level NYS officials ensured new companies laid claim to the supplied goods and got paid, leaving out the genuine suppliers. The same thing happened in the previous scandal. Brian, from where you sit,
Yep.
what should be done differently in terms of taking responsibility vis-a-vis what Mark has been saying?
I think it's all about leadership, and I've alluded before that this is the time that President Kenyatta has to leave a legacy. And for him to stamp his authority in terms of how the governance aspect is being run in this country, he has to set a precedence in this country. And he has to come out boldly and make decisions that will send, will ring bells in the minds of those who are culpable. And I'm saying this because if he has to be judged by history after exiting from the political scene, then he has to show Kenyans that he meant well for this country by protecting what is duly theirs. And I'm talking about public coffers, public resources, etc., etc. And because the systems are already set, the governance systems are there, the legal aspects are there, or the frameworks are existing, I think it's a matter of just making sure that it's proactive and ensuring that the aspect of, ensuring that all that goes well is adhered to the latter. And I'm talking about issues of procurement, which has been an ISO in every public sector. And I'm told that public procurement is now the in thing, the cause that is of choice by every young person who is actually looking forward to make money in the near future. And I'm saying that because when you go into most of the tertiary colleges and even our universities, the course is flooded. And the chances for somebody to get a new slot to enroll is very limited because it's already full to the brim. Absolutely. And this says something about what the mentalities of the people of this country is all about. It's wired in a way that is already prepared to take a jab in terms of corruption. And how do we address this? It's all about the value system of this country. How do we inculcate values where everybody knows or is inducted in a situation where he knows that engaging in corruption affects the long-term achievement goals of this country? How do we ensure that the value system is working in a way that everybody is aware about the demerits of engaging in corruption? And I will tell you an example of countries such as Singapore, which we normally refer every time that we want to, borrow best practices, that they have a value system where pupils from at kindergarten all the way to university level are entrenched in practices that catapult or support national government in terms of its values.
Right.
We have Article 10 here in our country, but how do we enforce Article 10 in terms of national values?
Right.
It's just on paper.
Values.
National values,
All
national
right.
values.
Kipchumba, values aside, something that Dismas said, the amount of nothing that has happened to previous thieves at the National Youth Service kind of, encourages more theft to happen. How does Kenya deal with this problem and this issue of IFMIS? Because that is where all these things seem to be directed at.
I think the country needs to be told the truth at some point. That one, we do not have the right correlation between the investigations being done in this country and what happens in court. Today, you have a person let's take for example what happened to the Nairobi business chairman. And if you see the charge sheet that was presented in court, any lawyer, even a first-year law student, will tell you this thing will not see the light of the day. So that is where we need to begin first. We need to get our acts together at the prosecutorial level. And I am happy Nordin is doing that. But look at it this way. We need the punitive action around NYS need to be so hard that anyone who will try to engage at the same offense will not even have an attempt because of this. These are people who are eating our future directly. The young people who are supposed to benefit from this fund cannot benefit. And here we are giving the same people the highest seats in the podium. When they come, we say, so and so, you have done well, but we are not calling them out. These are the people who go out there to become members of parliament. It is the same impunity and mediocrity that oozes out and ends up in parliament. That is why our parliament cannot come up with resolute laws to deal with corruption.
All right. This happens just after a few months after President Uhuru Kenyatta made those sweeping changes to prosecution and investigations department of his government. What will he be thinking reading this report of this NYS scandal, 10 billion shillings?
I hope that President Kenyatta is not getting this information from the newspapers, that his intelligence system has actually given him this information and is working on it. But before we even ask ourselves what President Kenyatta needs to do, let's look at our best practices. When Jerry Rawlings took over as president of Ghana, Ghana was a hotbed of corruption. A title I think Kenya has now managed to secure effortlessly. And all he did is, when you are found guilty of corruption, you are taken to the public square and shot. And everybody knew that in Ghana, if you steal, you're going to be shot. The incidences of corruption significantly reduced because Jerry Rawlings decided to give the anti-corruption his own goodwill, his own political capital. And in my view, that's what President Kenyatta needs to do. He must demonstrate beyond doubt that he's not going to allow anybody working at the executive to engage in corruption, even if he smells a whiff that any his direct appointees, cabinet secretaries, principal secretaries, parastatal chairs are engaging in corruption, they must be sent home packing. Now, if that doesn't happen, then people say there's a very good incentive for cheating. Kipchumba talks about prosecution that has been compromised. It's those cartels. I mean, if you steal 10 billion, it's very easy that you can play around with the criminal justice system and manipulate it. And at the end of the day, you go home smiling. In China, they have got a concept that if you steal public resources, number one, you are shot, and then all that resource is recovered, and then you are embarrassed. You become like a man during the Bible with leprosy. Nobody wants to touch you. But in Kenya, what happens when you steal resources? This morning, the fellows who are giving the highest amount of sadaka in churches have stolen resources. And what is the local priest and bishop saying? That the good Lord works in miraculous ways. He's blessing our sons. Our sons are in Nairobi. They've brought resources. But when you look at this chap, he does not engage in any factors of production. He simply engages in procurement. And that leads us to a very big question about the financial system in government. It seems the case that somebody took a decision that we need to give NYS money in truckloads without any projects planned at NYS. So towards the end of the financial period, these guys had money in truckloads. They did not know what to do with it. They said, let's spend. How can a public organization like NYS tell a supplier, well, let us Ovitu, paperwork to Tangalia next week, Monday? How does it happen? You deliver air, and then now on Monday, you start working on the processes, reverse engineering. And in my view, the public sector is supposed to embrace best practices in the private sector. They should engage in zero-based budgeting. That the accounting officer at NYS, when he's requesting for a budget, he needs to justify every single coin, saying that in the next financial period, this is the project that I'm going to run, I need 2 billion. And then you're able to say that if I get 2 billion, I'll be able to do these projects. Then the Treasury will allocate you that kind of resource, of course, through the parliamentary process. But here is NYS allocated, I think, 50 billion, and all the money they needed was 1 billion. What did they do with the 49 billion? Right. The guys running the show will call their friends, most of the time family and friends, and say we need to spend 49 billion in the next 3 months. How do we do this? I think we need to engage in that zero-based budgeting. And number two, ensure that those accounting officers are actually accounting officers. According to the same story, the fellow running NYS says he's not aware of all this money going through his NYS. Now, if the person responsible for NYS is not aware of this money that has gone through his fingers, then what does he know? What is he doing at NYS?
All right, Mark, have the last word on this very quickly. Why always NYS? And does this threaten to muddy the waters for President Kenyatta and his legacy completely?
The truth of the matter is if you look at the amount of corruption that has been flagged by our Auditor General, you will know it's not just NYS. NYS, I think, has the disadvantage of being in the public limelight before, and number two, because of our greater understanding of the system of NYS, then if you look at the stories of corruption now, it's almost as if it's a continuation of what happened before. So NYS is just more exposed because of the previous exposure. But that does not negate the fact that there's a lot of corruption happening in this country. And the thing is this, the president has to quickly realize that his mandate, whereas he cannot do what Jerry John Rawlings did in terms of shooting people in a public square without trial, the president can, however, begin to name and shame these corrupt individuals. And let me start by saying this. It is not enough to go after the person who was the CS or the PS. You need to go down to the person who's the procurement manager, the clerical officer who agreed to pay all this money. Every person in that system today needs to be asked to resign. That's what the president needs to do. For as long as the president is seen to take firm executive action and not judicial action, then he will create the political goodwill for the judiciary and the prosecution to be able to do what they need to do. What needs to happen is there can be no sacred cows. There can be no one who the prosecution feels like this is special to the government. So there needs to be no sacred cows, and everyone from top to bottom needs to face the music. If today an accountant went home because they've been fired for their role in ensuring this does not happen, and not what I said, not that they participated in the corruption, but they failed to stop the corruption.
Right.
They should be at home. If today we sent 10 accounting officers home because of that, corruption would reduce in this country. Same as we did that to a CS and a PS. So the only way that this can happen, number one, is we as a community need to kick out people who are corrupt from our churches. Right. We need to say this is unacceptable. We need to be able to hold accounting officers who work with infamous, who allowed this to happen. They need to be kicked out.
360-degree approach.
It needs to be 360.
All
That's
right.
the only way.
20 seconds only.
Yeah, 20 seconds. Actually, give me 21. It seems that a number of selected public servants have got a very high appetite for resources invested in the youth. And you remember even for the youth fund, before Osumba came in as the chairman, the guys who are running the show were so corrupt. So one wonders, how come these top public servants, the appetite for resources for the youth is just overwhelming? Is it that they don't have children or
20
grandchildren?
seconds are up. Good point, Vijana or Gutuke. So that is a story that we are following up on. The National Youth Service again reeling under a fresh looting scandal. 10 billion Kenya shillings is the amount that is suspected to have been looted out of public coffers. The money allegedly siphoned from an institution in the last 3 years. The NYS Director General, Richard Ndubai, has confirmed that investigations have been ongoing. Fresh challenge, very stern one for the new men in charge of the prosecution and investigations department. That is, of course, Nordin Haji as the new DPP and the new DCI, the new Director of Criminal Investigations, George Kinoti. A story that we will continue to follow up for you. Many thanks for staying with us here on Sunday edition. Stay with us. We take a quick commercial break. We are back shortly with my panel. We talk more politics and talk about the referendum debate, the push for constitutional changes, clamor for change of the 2010 Constitution. Stay with us.